I'm Barry Chandler, a Cork man, bringing you a story about another Cork man who sold a lot of whiskey. Welcome to episode number 2 of Stories and Sips. We are up and running. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for the support for our first video. Delighted to bring you the first story from Stories and Sips in episode number 2. Before we get into that, I want to acknowledge the support of Irish Whiskey Magazine. If you are not a subscriber to Irish Whiskey Magazine, my question to you is, do you even like whiskey? Irish Whiskey Magazine is the voice of the Irish whiskey industry. You'll see it behind me here on every video. It is an incredible magazine, and I'd like to thank Sergios and the team for their support for this video. Incredible magazine. Go ahead and subscribe. So let's get into today's video. Every year, dozens of young Irish men and women are dispatched from Ireland around the 4 corners of the globe, and they have one very clear, very simple mission: to push Irish whiskey to the locals, to educate them, help them learn about the joys of Irish whiskey. I'm talking, of course, about the brand ambassadors. They come from Jameson, they come from Teeling, they come from Tullamore Dew, and they go all over the world and make a large impact in the local communities with their introduction of Irish whiskey. But their path, of course, was paved by the granddaddy of them all, maybe the greatest brand ambassador ever, a man so good at pushing the hooch that the distillery he worked for named their best-selling whiskey after him. And why wouldn't they? Sure, wasn't he responsible for the great sales himself? I'm talking, of course, about Paddy Irish Whiskey and the man himself, Patrick J. O'Flaherty. Here's a close-up of Paddy there. Get that to focus. And I have a lovely drop of it here beside me, which I opened from an earlier bottle. Not much left in that one. Always have a backup. Now, Paddy was a fellow Corkman, and he was born in 1850. And in 1872, he went to work for the Cork Distilleries Co. And he was born into a family who were already in the alcohol business. His mother's family ran a pub, and he decided he too wanted to go into the alcohol business. And so he worked for a very famous distillery at the time, the Cork Distilleries Co. And his job was to go around the country and introduce people to the joys of their flagship product, their flagship whiskey, which was known as Old Irish Whiskey. So the full name of the whiskey he had to push was the Cork Distilleries Company Old Irish Whiskey. Now, Paddy was reputedly a small man in stature, but a big man larger than life in terms of his character. And Paddy would go on the train from Cork as far east as Youghal. He'd go north to Mallow, and he'd get a little jaunting car, little horsing car between the train and the local towns. But Paddy would go into these towns, and he would try and convince the locals to try his whiskey. I can't imagine it took a whole lot of convincing now in the late 1800s to get the Irish to sample a bit of free whiskey. But Paddy would go from bar to bar, and he would buy rounds of drink. He would buy rounds of his own, with the whiskey that he was pushing. And people loved to see him coming. Of course they did. So wasn't he bringing free whiskey with him? And rumour has it that he would often dip into his own pocket just to buy more rounds of the whiskey, so that more people could sample the joys of the Old Irish whiskey. Now, legend has it that he would send word ahead to the town that he was coming, and that people would turn out in their droves to welcome him. We don't know if that's true, because we do know that legend is just rumour plus time. Nobody's alive today to tell us whether they were there to welcome Paddy or not, but it's a nice little flourish to the story. Paddy was very good at what he did, and he was very good at getting people to sample the whiskey, and once they sampled it once, they bought it the next time. And what would happen over time is Paddy would go from bar to bar and from town to town. More of the locals would demand the whiskey after he left, and the tavern, the pub owners at the time, would write notes, order forms to the Cork Distilleries Company demanding a case or two of Paddy's whiskey. And so he became synonymous with the whiskey, became known as Paddy's whiskey to the locals. So much so that before Paddy retired in around 1912, 1913, Cork Distilleries Company decided in his honour, or maybe it was just a marketing stunt, it's hard to know, in his honour they were going to rename their whiskey to Paddy. So they bought the rights to his name. Patrick J. O'Flaherty was his full name. They dropped the O in some versions of Paddy, although in older bottles you might see Paddy O'Flaherty on the bottles. But Paddy's name is on these bottles to this day. So you'll see on the neck of the bottle here, you'll see it says it's Paddy's Round. You might get a close-up of that. Tough to get that to focus. There you go. It's Paddy's Round. You'll see Paddy's signature all over the bottle. And Interestingly enough, you've got the 4 provinces of Ireland here on the bottle, and in 4 colours. Thanks to Matt Healy from potstill.com, who wrote a great article recently and referred me to this yesterday, pointing out that the 4 colours of the provinces on the bottle are actually the incorrect colours. They're the wrong colours, and nobody knows why. They're not the actual colours of our provinces. Now, growing up in Ireland, there's a good chance your house had one of 4 whiskies in it. You either had Powers, Bushmills, Jameson, or Paddy in it. It was always just in case. You had a bottle of whiskey just in case. I don't know just in case of what. Maybe it was a scratch to the knee, or maybe you got a sniffle or a cold, or maybe you were just thirsty. But everyone had a bottle of whiskey in their house. Our house was a Powers house. We didn't have Paddy. But I'll always associate Paddy with working behind the bar at the Commodore Hotel in Cove from an early age. And the smell of Paddy to this day, anytime I take a little sniff of Paddy, it instantly transports me back to the Maritime Bar in the Commodore Hotel, cleaning tables and serving pints and small ones to the locals. And it's a lovely memory of the 1990s for me. Paddy whiskey used to be produced in Cork City, used to be distilled in Cork City until the 1920s. And in the 1920s, it moved production down to Middleton, to the Middleton Distillery. And the Cork Distilleries Company kept going, were in existence till the 1960s, when they merged with the other distillers in Ireland it was a really tough time for distilleries in Ireland in the 60s. And in order to survive, the Cork Distilleries Company, along with a number of other distilleries, combined to form what is now known as Irish Distillers. And so Irish distillers have continued to produce Paddy whiskey. It's now owned by Sazerac, an American company based in New Orleans, and it's been a part of their portfolio since 2016. But as part of that sale, production of Paddy was to continue at the Middleton Distillery, and long may that continue. 100 years after Paddy retired, Irish Distillers commemorated his retirement with a 100-year centenary edition of Paddy and an original pot still whiskey, a 7-year-old pot still. This Paddy whiskey is a blend. It's a blended whiskey. I don't have a bottle of that right here, but I do have a bottle of it in my possession. A very nice gentleman from Arizona was kind enough to bring it back from Ireland, and he has it in his house at the moment. And if you're watching, I hope you're keeping it safe. I'll be coming out for it soon. Imagine being so good at what you did. Even though you weren't a distiller, you weren't the blender, you weren't in charge of maturation, but you were so good that the distillery still named a bottle of whiskey after you. That was Paddy Flaherty. Paddy fact. In 1954, the movie On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando won 8 Academy Awards. And what was most amazing about that movie was not the Academy Awards at all, but the fact that Paddy Irish whiskey made an appearance multiple times in the movie. It was on the bar in many, many scenes. And I would argue that without Paddy being on the counter, without Paddy being available perhaps to the crew and to the actors, there's no way they could have put on a performance worthy of 8 Academy Awards. Another Paddy fact, this is a great one. So Paddy died about 10, 12 years after he retired, and Paddy today is buried in St. Joseph's Cemetery in Turner's Cross in Cork. And he's buried in the cemetery that was opened in 1830 by a Father Matthew. And if you are from Cork, you'll be familiar with Father Matthew. Father Matthew was known as the Apostle of Temperance. He was vehemently against alcohol, and he railed against the sins and the ills of whiskey for much of the 19th century. Today, Paddy is buried not a stone's throw from Father Matthew in that very cemetery, where I'd imagine Paddy is still trying to convince him of the joys of his lovely little drink and trying to convert him. Paddy is a very affordable whiskey. I bought this bottle in Ohio for $17, which is about 14 euros, which is incredible value and maybe the greatest value Irish whiskey on the market at the moment. It's a soft, underrated, very pleasant, easy to drink whiskey. It's so soft you could put it on your cornflakes. I didn't tell you to put it on your cornflakes. Paddy, you are indeed a legend, and you are both a story and a sip worth celebrating. As they say in Cork, fair play to you, boy. Slán Paddy.